We're going to move right along with our second keynote speaker for the morning, Miss Sarah Lee. Sarah is the Scotland manager at the EAUC, one of our sister associations based in the UK, and manages the very successful Universities and Colleges Climate Commitment for Scotland. Sarah is a board member of the Sustainable Development Education Network and is a member of the business team of the newly formed UNU Regional Centre of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development, now called Learning for Sustainability Scotland. And I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that initiative when Sarah comes up here. It's a great pleasure to have Sarah join us here, all the way from Scotland. So please welcome her to the stage with a wonderful round of applause.
Thank you very much for having me along. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. Thank you very much for having me along. Very nerve-wracking being following Ian, because fantastic presentation. I suppose what I wanted to give you a snapshot about is what we're doing in Scotland. I suppose from what we've heard this morning about government and where we're, what we're facing globally, I suppose I'm a little bit. It's a bit interesting because in Scotland we've got probably a slightly different overview. My presentation will be on the EAUC, bit of background, some of the drivers that we have in Scotland, a snapshot of the Scottish sector, a little bit about us and what we do in Scotland and the UCCCfS, as Leanne has mentioned, the Regional Centre for Expertise, and some challenges and benefits, because it's not all a rosy overview. So I do hope you find it useful, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end if we do have time. Otherwise I'll be around all during the conference. So in terms of the EAUC, you'll probably notice that the four strategic themes that we work to mirror very closely what you'll see in the program for ACTS, and also in terms of life, learning in future environments. We are a sister organisation to both ACTS and EAUC, and where we probably differ from ACTS is that we have a dedicated office in Scotland and in the UK and in Scotland, with paid staff. So we work with universities and colleges across the UK to try and embed sustainability and encourage their performance. Scotland is actually funded separately to support the differences with devolved governments that we face, with the requirements there. And I'll come back to the Scotland office a little bit later. In terms of some of the drivers that we face, the drivers that we have for Scotland, in 2009 in Brussels at Green Week, it was announced that the Scottish Parliament had passed the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, which is the strongest climate change legislation in the world at that point. It was passed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament, and it was also announced that we would have very ambitious targets of 42% by 2020 and 80% by 2050. Now we're on track to meet that 42% reduction for 2020. 2050 is another story. It's a long way away. It could be quite a challenge, I think. The Scottish Government has announced that they're working towards renewable sources to generate the equivalent of 100% of Scotland's electricity consumption by 2020. So we do have a lot of drive behind us in terms of what we're in a legislative and government support. We also have legislation in terms of duties on public bodies. So universities and colleges have actually been named within those duties as a public body, although we're not specifically seen as a public body. But we have a role to play. We have students who are a huge drive for what we do for change. They're our next resource-efficient workforce. They are, they are our future for where we're trying to go. So it's about reducing emissions and through education support. There's a report done that was released in June this year, Low Carbon Scotland between 2013 and 2027, which is the report on policies and proposals. So it outlines how we, as Scotland, we will drive that change. We have, we're almost at the end of the UN Decade for Education for Sustainable Development, and the Scottish Government have declared support through that. We have a second action plan for the decade called Learning for Change. Universities and colleges again have been outlined for some separately for some action through that. And more recently, the Scottish Funding Council, who fund universities and colleges within Scotland, have made a commitment through their outcome agreements that universities and colleges will address carbon footprinting and support learning for change in all activity. Previously, sustainability was seen as financial sustainability in terms of the Funding Council. So just to give you an example of some of the government support and Scottish Government objectives, we've got Greener Scotland, which is one of the Scottish Government objectives. So we want to live in a Scotland that is wealthier and fairer, smarter, healthier, safer and stronger, and greener. So this is one of the campaigns that you'll see on the left-hand side that has been set up. One of the government-sponsored agencies, Zero Waste Scotland, has also been given an objective that we're trying to move towards being a zero-waste society. That's not easy, and it's going to take quite a while, but we're working towards that. One of the programs within Zero Waste Scotland is the Resource Efficient Scotland program. So that's now looking at all areas of efficiency. So as I've said, it's not just about emissions and consumption, it's about education. Through the UNESCO report on education for sustainable development in the UK, you'll be able to read up here, in Scotland there is a greater focus on more integrated and coherent approach to sustainable development, and ESD within communication being recognised by policymakers and practitioners as a key enabler in the transition to a sustainable society. So, I think we're very, obviously from what we were hearing this morning, we're very blessed in the sense that we have that backing, we have that support from government, we have that through our policy, and we are trying to drive that change. Scotland is quite a small, I think it's probably the equivalent of Panama. There is 5.2 million people, so we're not looking at the scale of what you have in Australia, but we do have our own challenges. We have remote locations, island locations, and it's about educating and sharing those practices. So just putting ESD into context and linking to wider processes, schools have been a huge driving force, and there's been a big shift in the schools approach. I know we're here from tertiary side of things, but there is a link of where we're going and how we're driving change. So the General Teaching Council for Scotland has now introduced that every teacher in Scotland must be a member of the General Teaching Council, and they must achieve the professional standards, and they need to be renewed every 5 years. So through that, ESD is shown in all areas of activity, through teaching, playtimes, lunch, sports, you name it. Then we move on to One Planet Schools, which is a group that was set up with a ministerial chair, driving change within schools. One Planet Schools, there was a report developed with 31 recommendations. And one of those recommendations is that there is an entitlement for all students to receive sustainability and education for sustainable development throughout their teaching and their school systems. So that means that there is a legal entitlement, and there is actually it can be challenged through the courts if people didn't feel that that was something that their children receiving through schools. This frames the work for Education Scotland, who is the inspectorates, and the Scottish Qualifications Authority. This covers the college sector for us as well. So moving on to how it all joins together is that Sustainable Development Education Network, which was mentioned, is a charity organisation, and it brings together all areas of education, from outdoor learning, communities, schools, tertiary sector, and wider. And they have been the driving force behind the UN University's Regional Centre for Expertise in ESD. I will come back to that, but the Sustainable Development Education Network is now a part of the newly formed RCE. It's for the reason for applying for the Regional Centre for Expertise was about legacy. Move on. So the EAUC in Scotland, we have a fairly wide program of what we do. There are 2 of us in the office, currently down to 1, but we will be getting another member of staff fairly soon. We work with all institutions, not just members. The EAUC is a member-led organisation, but we do work with all the institutions. They do obviously have a much wider benefit of being a member of the EAUC. In terms of grassroots support, we run topic support networks. So we have 9 of those that run twice a year, ranging from, we have 2 ESD topic support networks for tertiary, so for colleges and for universities: energy, waste management, travel, promoting positive behaviour, sustainable construction, ICT. So they're about a practitioner-led group that shares best practice, updates on emerging legislation and regulations, quite often site visits, industry presentations, and we're now looking at trying to develop those more on a regional basis as well to try and support regional issues. We run a series of events and training per year, responsive to the sector needs. We've done things from leadership and management type training. We've run common cause, looking at values behind behaviour change, energy footprinting, social media. So yeah, it's quite wide-ranging. We also run a Scotland conference every second year. So we've got one coming up in February next year, which will be held at the Scottish Government offices, because we've got very, very good relationships with them, and it's about identifying that, we do work in partnership there. The UCCCfS, I will come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. We also manage a college ESD project. So through the Scottish Funding Council, we've been given an extra pot of money, looking at staff engagement and visits. We've got 2 consultants that work with us on this, and it's about embedding sustainability into the curriculum and running some student-led activities. Some of the areas that have been addressed so far are hair and beauty, construction, business management and agriculture, but through the consultants they honestly believe that there is absolutely no area that sustainability cannot be embedded within the curriculum. Through the student-led activities, we're looking at running a Green Dragon's Den project, so getting the students to put their proposals forward and being judged on those, and having an awards ceremony, and thinking about some Eco Master Chef and some activities like that as well to recognise what's happening within the sector. And finally, our stakeholder engagement and partners. As I said, we're a very small office. Relationships are vital for the delivery for our ambitious plans for what we do in Scotland. So the UCCCfS is a voluntary commitment in which all universities and colleges have now signed. It was launched in 2009, and October 2011 was when we reached 100% sign-up. It's about addressing climate change within an institutional level. So each institution, it's been signed by a principal in the initial stages, and then each institution will produce a 5-year climate change action plan with SMART targets. So it's not about making a commitment and leaving it to one side, it's about how you actually deliver that change. And then we look at reporting progress on an annual basis. As a part of that, I receive all of the sector reports, and I've just finished a report for the Scottish Funding Council to assist them in meeting their legal requirements of reporting emissions on their public body's duties to Scottish Government. Learning for change and guidance on public bodies, so within the UN decade, and also addressing climate change. So this is all, it's our umbrella approach, I suppose, to all the activity that we do in Scotland. I have nicked this slide from Scottish Government presentation, but it's just to give you a bit of a snapshot on what the Scottish Government are looking for in terms of, they call it sustainability reporting. I think it's probably wrongly named because they are looking particularly at climate issues and emissions. So I won't obviously read all of that out, but reporting requirements have increased within probably the last 2 years. It's not mandatory to report, but because we have legislation and duties on public bodies, there is a push to do that. While it's not mandatory right now, Scottish Government ministers could change their mind at any time, and there are discussions about whether they actually do make this a mandatory process. The UCCCfS reporting, however, is about the climate change action plans that have been produced. It's about producing progress on those plans. It's not a benchmarking exercise, it's about each institution's progress. So it's not just about emissions, and it's not just about the consumption. In March this year, we produced a 2-page report template, and that has gone out to the sector. So it's about a narrative on what you're doing in terms of education, what you're doing in terms of your biodiversity activity, procurement, waste, as well as looking at some hard figures on emissions. So that's obviously, it's been developed with the sector, but we obviously need to do more work. It's been in a beta testing year this year, and we've had some very useful feedback, so we're looking at sort of developing that a little bit further. But it has given us the opportunity to compare universities and colleges on an even keel. When we've been out looking for reports and figures in the past, it has been like comparing apples and pears because of what we've been non-prescriptive on what we've been asking for. Now we're looking for something that's a little bit more succinct, and I think we've been able to drive that forward. So this is just to show some of the relationships that we have in terms of reporting. So we've got the Climate Change Act, we've got duties on public bodies, and the Scottish Government have also done some the public sector sustainability reporting guidance. So through the Scottish Funding Council, who have to report back to the Scottish Government on emissions, they fund us, the EAUC in Scotland for the UCCCfS activity. Universities and colleges collate their sustainability data through, we have HESA returns, higher education statistics agencies, and colleges have been a little bit different recently with how they collate information. So again, it's about having a collective approach and comparable data. So then that goes back up through the process. There are also other things like the carbon reduction commitment and EU trading standards that have to be, some of the larger organisations, institutions have to feed into. Basically, you know, I think our approach here is that you can't manage what you don't measure. You know, if we don't capture this information, how are we supposed to improve? But again, as I've mentioned previously, data, it's not all about the data, it's about the narrative on the progress. You know, it's about leadership, it's about partnerships, it's about the engagement, and it's about ESD as well. So, learning for sustainability is what we have now developed as our regional centre for expertise. It is having a formal launch event in November with ministers coming along, but it's been a long process. This process started in 2011. There were a lot of organisations that were brought on board to look at this. And as I've mentioned previously, it's about the legacy for after the UN decade ends. So what are we going to do? Does everything just stop? And bringing all the organisations that have worked together so far and driven this change, you know, once the end of the decade ends, does that mean everything stops? So, you know, we were looking for a mechanism for us to continue delivery. The vision was to bring together educators and researchers to provide training, networking, sharing research, and action to bring that forward. So we're looking at primary, secondary, tertiary education, outdoor learning, communities. There's been representation from people like eco schools, ourselves, the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, the Scottish Natural Heritage, the SDE network. There's been a number of different organisations that have come together to write this application. We were challenged quite strongly on the fact that we were doing it as a region of Scotland, not just a smaller. You know, we were asked whether that was it should be broken down. But as I've sort of hopefully demonstrated a bit earlier, with government and the organisations that we work with, they are national organisations. So it would end up being double handling to try and to break it down within regions. So we actually work very well in Scotland to drive that. So I think for us, it's not. It may look very rosy that we have government support, that we have a number of sponsored agencies that are, that help us drive this change. There have been a lot of challenges that we've had to face. Regionalisation of colleges has been a massive change over the last 18 months. We've gone from 43 colleges down to 15. That has been, especially when we've been working with the climate commitment, your contacts have gone, people, you have to be sensitive about people losing their jobs. There are changes within structures within universities and colleges, within the colleges, and it is very much, it's a changing landscape. It's not as easy just to continue on. So, we're redeveloping ourselves as much as we have to redevelop, the services that we're providing to the sector. in terms of changing and increasing estates and facilities, we have more resource-intensive labs, which are, producing better outputs and information, new development of facilities, of cutting-edge technologies. Carbon is a focus, particularly for the Scottish Government, but it's not everything. It's about the education. It's about a holistic approach to all of this. Again, as I've mentioned, the sponsored agencies, we used to have the Carbon Trust in Scotland who helped drive a lot of the carbon activity. They were dissolved and became a national organisation only in March this year. So, it's about, again, relationships and working with people that we wouldn't be able to do unless we continued those, and you feel like you are knocked down quite often, but you just have to pick yourself up and start again. So, but there are benefits within that as well. Sometimes it's a fresh start. So sometimes it's about reinvigorating something that has perhaps been a little bit. It's been a bit fatigued, and it's a new way of addressing these things. As I've mentioned, the end of the UN decade, it could have been that we just say, okay, well, that's been fun, and move on. But we haven't. We've started again. We've looked at how do we continue that approach, and how do we move forward and continue to deliver. And finally, it's about continued support. We end our funding in Scotland in March next year, so we're putting in applications for new funding, and we hope that we're continuing to exist in Scotland so that we can support the sector. But yeah, it's all up in the air. So for us, it's a great opportunity, but it's also, we don't know what the future's going to hold for us. We need to focus on a delivery mechanism that is for the future. It's about, our students. I suppose, at the end of the day, we are educational facilities, and we need to support that. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.